Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, What You Need to Know About the M-19-21 Deadline. I'd like to start by introducing today's speakers. I'm Dean Meisenheimer. I'm the Director of Sales Engineering for Gimmal, and I'll be your host. With me is Pat Brim, Senior Account Executive for Gimmal, and Linda Montgomery. Linda is recently retired as the Director of Knowledge Management for the Department of Energy's Idaho National Laboratory. As the director, she managed the records, documents, technical writing, research library, and export control groups. And prior to that, she was general counsel for 20 years for various large government contractors. Linda's been recognized for lifetime achievement from Who's Who, the National Law Journal's 50 Trailblazers in Energy and Environmental Law, and the Idaho Business Journal's Icon Award. So before we jump into the meat of the webinar, a little bit of housekeeping. If you do have questions today, please submit your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A panel. At the end, we'll address as many of the questions as we have time for. During the webinar, there is one poll question that will pop up. It's interactive. Please answer the poll and we'll present the results in real time so that you can see the opinions of all your co-attendees. We are recording today's session, and the recording will be made available after the webinar to everyone. And should you have any issues at all, please reach out through the chat panel or the Q&A panel and let us know, and we'll do everything we can to help you. A little bit about Gimmal. Founded in 2002, Gimmal is a records information management and governance software company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risk that it presents. Whether you're trying to discover information, respond to requests, or comply with policies, Gimmal can help. We have a client success, We have a client success team and global network of partners that deliver solutions together with our primary technology partners, Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to create an efficient digital workplace, and our solutions include records management, content governance for SharePoint, Altitude for file analysis, document management for SAP solutions, and our newest offering, Gimmal Migration, which helps you achieve the fastest migrations to Microsoft 365. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Pat Brim. Pat?
Thanks, Dean. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending. I really would take just a couple minutes and think about some of the lessons learned, really, that Gimmal's went through that I think could be helpful as you think about your own perspective on what you need to put together for your overall strategy in implementing a records management program, and what you need to think about in terms of your research, your requirements, and ultimately your rollout of such a program. So the first three bullets here are really around requirements and certifications that you may need to align with based on your department or agency requirements. These should be kind of right in your wheelhouse in terms of records managers in your role. You should be comfortable with determining what requirements you're going to need or certifications you're going to need. So for instance, when we put Gimmal Records Management product on Schedule 36, we self-certified against NARA's Universal Electronic Requirements Management, ERM requirements. So I'm anticipating you probably review those requirements. They're quite extensive, but pretty succinct in terms of what you're looking for in a records management solution. You may need to lean into a DoD 5015 type of solution. We've went through that certification. Clearly that fits more into our defense, maybe intel, though we've had a number of civilian clients deploy it. Or at your own departmental or agency level, for instance, Department of Energy has their own records management compliance requirements that we've worked with as we've rolled out in multiple energy environments as well. So think through your requirements, but then maybe there's an area that you spend a little less time considering when you're thinking about your overall program, and that's the implementation aspect. So basically encourage you to get together with your enterprise architectures folks, your IT group, your security people, and think about what that implementation might look like sooner rather than later in your process. We've put together a FedRAMP moderate environment, for instance, for Gimmal records management. So if you're thinking cloud first, a FedRAMP environment may be a great fit for you. But regardless, even if it's a cloud offering, you still have to go through the ATO process, right? So, we've went through that process with various agencies. So that happens, whether or not you're deploying on premise or in the cloud. So you need to allow some time and energy around that. We've had the opportunity to deploy in various federal cloud environments, Azure, GovCloud. We're working now in AWS, and we've connected into M365 in federal agencies, and that's another piece of ATO in terms of how you connect into that environment. So give some thought up front as to what you might need from an implementation, what your overall department or agency implementation strategy looks like. And then ultimately, if you're going to do a procurement, or hopefully when you do some type of procurement to start your compliance journey, you have to think about what that strategy looks like. And we're going to touch base on some of that with Linda as we move forward here. So let's talk a little bit about the M-19-21 directive. This is something I'm pretty confident you're aware of, I'm probably well versed in, so I'm not going to kind of belabor these points too much. But the requirements that I just discussed in terms of the records management solution that I just mentioned, they really speak to more about what solution needs to be able to do for your organization. This is really more focused on really, what has to be done to be compliant, and particularly points 2 and 3 here in terms of managing all your permanent records electronically and with appropriate metadata. We'll touch base on that a little bit, but this kind of expanded M1218 and it brought into play your paper analog format type of records. And so that combined with the idea that all of your paper has to be managed electronically, your temporary records, or stored offsite in a commercial storage facility, that is really driving a lot of activity now. We've been pretty busy in working with clients. So, as you think about these directives, we're going to touch base now about how you can get aligned and get really going on it. So today we're going to talk more about the what, how you kind of progress on this journey. And I think, Dean, to kick it off, you had a poll question for everybody.
Yep. And here's our first poll question of the day, or our only poll question of the day, rather. What is the current status of your M-19-21 implementation? You have a plan in place. You have a funded project. Your project's currently in process. You're on track to meet the deadline, or you haven't even begun yet, and that's one of the reasons you're here today. So take a moment, pick a choice in the poll. As I mentioned, we'll be tabulating all the votes up, and we'll show you the results here in real time in just a moment, so we can kind of see where everyone is at in regards to M-19-21. We know the deadline, deadlines, some deadlines have passed, some deadlines are looming out there, and a lot of actions that need to be taken. So be good to see where everyone is at.
Mm-hmm. We've really started to work through, fairly comprehensive programs with agencies that are on some point in this life cycle of the journey from, scanning, capture, all the way through, the digitization process and putting it in some repository in order to be able to track it appropriately. So there's a lot of moving pieces and parts.
All right, and we have our results. So 60% of you haven't begun yet. So that's, so glad to have you here today. Hopefully you'll pick up some good tips on kind of where to begin. Another 20% are actually in process, which is fantastic. And 10% of you feel like you're on track to meet the deadlines, which is also great. So good statistics. So let's go ahead and move on now with the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Dean. So Linda was gracious enough to join us today. And full disclosure, we've had an opportunity to work with Linda when she was at INL. And when we chatted with her about this webinar, I wanted to give her a chance to walk through kind of her thoughts on it, I assured her this isn't a Gimmal commercial. We really are looking to provide some value here for our audience, and to hear somebody that's really kind of lived through a lot, or lion's share of what we're going down the path here to discuss. So Linda, I think I'll just turn it over to you, and perhaps you can walk through some of the points that that you wanted to chat with us about today.
Sounds great. And you're exactly right. I have definitely lived this. I would tell you generally, for those of you who have not started, now's the time to start, because 2 years is not very long, particularly in government implementation, to try to get your funding, your support, your planning, your approvals, and rolling out and really getting started. So don't panic, but don't delay. Secondly, as being even though I'm retired, as being a good government contractor and a federal support person, obviously my opinions don't represent the agency or any of the government entities. These are my opinions alone from hard-won experience. Mm-hmm. So the first place to start is assess where you are, which sounds really, really easy. But I know for a lot of large projects, you've got records hiding everywhere, and you don't even know where they are. The ones that you're actively managing, you probably got in pretty good shape. But one of the things that I was facing in my most recent job is that we had about 5 million records that we were actively managing, and they were in pretty good shape. I estimated that we had 3 times that in unstructured data out there that probably had records in them, but we just didn't know. So just getting an idea of how big is the problem is the first step. Secondly, it's really easy to get discouraged with the first step because you go, oh my gosh, this is so big, I can't possibly do it. And I should tell you that it's okay to just start somewhere, and then start it in small chunks, because what you want to be able to do is to be able to show quick wins, be able to demonstrate that you're learning as you go and that you get value added from what you implement. So, you start with the big, but then you attack the small. And that way you can be held accountable for beginning, middle, and end. Because a lot of times if you're trying to hold yourself accountable for everything, that's kind of a lifetime career. And so it's not very measurable. So figure out what everything is, and then break it into really small bite-sized chunks, and then start somewhere. I would tell you, I usually start on the easiest stuff, because you will have a learning curve, and you might as well learn on the stuff that's easy instead of tackling the things that are the hardest. And my last point, just to get started, is that as record professionals, we take this seriously because we understand records are important, and that it's a compliance item, both for the federal agency and for their support contractors. But, you're having to go to people that are balancing lots of other competing investment decisions. And so I don't think the fact that it's a compliance item alone is a good enough justification to get a really good investment and the attention you need from the whole organization to make this a success. And so one of my advice to you is to calculate a return on investment so it makes business sense in addition to a compliance driver. And what I mean by that is go find people that will be advocates on your behalf. I hate to say this, but, for most organizations, records are just not very sexy. They don't really care. And so you've got to put it into a context that they should care. I remember sitting in a senior staff meeting, and we were trying to make a investment decision, and we're choosing between a new ambulance, which is life-saving, replacing a roof, which was trying to start to leak, buying electron scanning microscope, which was part of our core mission, and investing in a software upgrade that nobody understood what the software was.
Mhm.
So I can tell you the last one didn't get funded. And so part of this is to put it in plain language terms. Why should I care if I'm not a records person? So there's a couple places that you can go to get advocates on your behalf that can kind of chime in and go, oh yeah, they say it's important, but here's why it's important to me. And that can be really important.
Mhm.
So there we go.
Yeah, so Linda, I mean, the ROI concept is a really interesting one. I've worked with a couple folks that as we looked at what could make up that ROI, there was some soft kind of aspects to it. It could be just how much time people take to try to find records, how much time it takes for the records management team to do their job. But then there were some, hard costs in terms of just saving on infrastructure and perhaps moving off of legacy systems and those types of things. So they probably need to give some real thought to where those cost savings that where they could find them within their agency.
Yeah, and obviously every company and organization is slightly different, and so this argument you have to build for your organization specifically. A couple of places though that you may not think about that you've got ready-made advocates. The first is the legal office. If you think about long-term old records and a lawsuit or litigation, the legal office is one of the biggest consumers of that. And when you start getting into lawsuits, you get into multi-millions of dollars very quickly. And not being able to find records or effectively be able to sort and support the litigation can actually impose sanctions on the organization. So that gets to big dollars really quickly. On the other hand, that doesn't happen very often. So something that happens a little more often is go talk to your Freedom of Information officer because they're yet again another big customer of the ultimate records and being able to find things and be responsive. Because again, the agency gets penalized if they're not responsive. An interesting thing that I did, because our mission organizations were they're very doer focused, and they thought all of this administrative support stuff just, you're supposed to just take care of it and not bother me, kid. So one of the things we did to kind of focus people's attention is we created an example Freedom of Information Act request that was very cross-cutting, and we sent that to the managers and said, okay, if you were going to have to find these things, how long would it take your people to go through their email on their laptops and their temporary records, not the permanent records, but the temporary ones, to be able to respond to Freedom of Information Act request, like one that comes through Congress or somebody else like that. And when I started looking at time taken away from mission, suddenly the return on investment to get this right was huge. So.
So that's an example, I think, of when you think about where to get started, there's a right place. You mentioned legal. The challenge with legal is, well, okay, I won't get too deep into it. You're a lawyer, but
I'm a lawyer. You can say it.
But it's they usually have certain kind of ways that they handle records and legal. So legal can be a little bit interesting on its own, but we've also found HR, personnel records or something obvious that need to be looked after closely, and then even just if you look at standard operating procedures and those types of things. But was there a place that kind of jumped out at you that might be a good place to start?
for me to try to get advocates, it was the most, the people that had the power were the people that were executing the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so all I needed to do was to find one really good mission individual that kind of got the idea. Now, the Idaho National Lab is a very large research institution. And so trying to get them to think about how effective is your research if you can't find prior research, or more than just the published paper. It's nice to know a lot more information about the methodology and what didn't work. And most of those things don't make it into published papers. And so when the researchers started realizing that records could be a wealth of information to support the mission, suddenly they became much stronger advocates. I've also, I used to be in a very large logistics construction support company doing Department of Defense. And the same thing there. If you wanted to be able to have effective records to figure out where they were able to take shortcuts on projects and solutions were effective, that can be very powerful. Who were all of the vendors that we used prior, and what did we think of them? The records for vendors are there, but not necessarily the soft information of, well, yeah, they got it done, but we weren't real happy with it. And so being able to grab not only the formal records, but kind of the informal, and produce them in a way that they're relevant and useful.
And findable, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you think about, this was obviously a big job at INL and just federal in general, but you talked a little bit about just getting started. Architecturally, there's some things that we've come across, centralized records management, manage in place kind of concepts, et cetera. But regardless of that architecture, you do need to get started and you need a project that's manageable. So when you think about the management activities and trying to make it something that people can get their head around, because it's a big job, the thought here was, how do you break that project into something that is manageable?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. Number one, this is one of those places where it's really helpful to have all sorts of different skills in your project team, because records people tend to be very detail oriented and very focused and highly analytical, very focused on near-term organization. For really large projects, you probably need somebody who is bigger picture, pie in the sky, not so much worried about the details, but can see the whole span of where you're going. Both pieces are important and both contribute. You probably need to have somebody early on that's in the procurement and to understand how you set up the contract to effectively manage it. You want somebody on your team that, if you're going for a software that really, as you said, Pat, the enterprise architect that can figure out how does your software system work and what's the easiest way to get from here to there. What I found is usually there's not one giant software that works that does everything. So you've got to have a software that does the core stuff that plugs in to everything else you've got. And so how do you know if it'll plug in, and what do we need to adjust to be able to have it plug in? And so you can start asking those kind of questions and then creating a miniature project around each of those questions to be able to get the answers, and then have a project manager. Don't try to manage it yourself. Actually go get a project manager, because this is a big lift for an enterprise. and they know how. They're not the experts on records, and they're not the experts on software, and they're not the experts on systems, but they're experts on organizing it into manageable chunks.
Yeah, and one last little kind of quick point is that the end user community, right? You're trying to implement something that they're not going to know what the GRS schedule is.
Yep.
Nor will they care. So you're trying to put something into place that, as you pointed out, integrates in such a way that if done correctly, the end users may or may not know they're actually participating in records management, right? And so there's a change management aspect that's got to be put together as well.
Well, and also there is always a little bit of a learning curve, even if you've got something that's fairly seamless and intuitive. And so part of the project should be, how do you educate people? What's the best way to communicate? How do you drive adoption? I sat in the information management organization for quite a while, and we were really good at doing really cool tools that nobody knew we had. Because we didn't drive the adoption and implementation. So it's a little bit like the golf game. You got to have the follow through to be able to sink the putt.
Well, listen, I think just to be mindful of everyone's time. Great points. I know we have a couple questions that have popped up. So Dean, I think I'll hand it back over, and we can see where we want to go with the Q&A and wrap up.
Okay. So if you do want to know more, I love that last point you made, Linda, about get a solid project manager to do the project management. That's their expertise, and you provide the expertise around the records pieces. If you do have questions, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the really cool thing about working for the federal government is that we do have access to wonderful specialties. And so why not use the experts in each of the different areas to get you the very best product that you can? Don't struggle in the dark by yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. If you do have questions, now's the time to type them into the Q&A panel or the chat panel, and we'll get to those in just a moment. If you would like some additional information, there are blog posts out on Gimmal.com. I've put links here to a couple of the blog posts. You don't have to remember all of these. You don't have to memorize this slide now while I have it on the screen. We will be sending out a link to the recording of the webinar and the slides within 24 to 48 hours, so you'll be able to come back and reference this. But there are a couple of blog posts here on Gimmal.com that might be helpful, as well as there's a lot of links here that Linda's provided to really good resources out there that can help you, gather the information you need and kind of help you build your business case. So with that, I think we're going to go to the Q&A portion, if I can advance the slide here. We did have a couple of questions that came in here in the chat. The first one is, how do you tie the ROI to the enterprise and the impact to components, areas like FOIA or privacy or litigation, and not just to records management?
Well, if I can just real briefly, we talked, Linda chatted a little bit about that, but I think I mentioned, we've worked on some kind of hard numbers around ROI, like an ROI calculator, which is not proprietary. I'm happy to share with people, but you actually, there's a lot of good information on FOIA by agency. So you can actually get the information on what it costs to provide a FOIA request, for instance, and litigate a FOIA request. So anything you can do in the records area to streamline that process, that's one pretty easy way to look at the numbers. So Linda, was there any other thoughts you had on that?
The other thing I would do is I would contact your CFO office, because numbers are their business, and say, okay, here's all the places I can see impacts. Can you help me find numbers to, really quantify what those impacts are?
Yeah.
And again, that's building your team. Get people to help you that are the experts in the area.
Yeah. Hey, I noticed too, Dean, there was a thought about some tiger teams to demonstrate needs. One other thing that we've found that can be useful, depending on kind of availability of resources, but particularly around M-19-21, we've been doing a few interesting pilots, taking a cross section of paper, right? Doing some scanning, OCRing, and I mentioned the metadata earlier, and then we kind of rushed past it, but that's an area when you think about transfer to NARA and what's required in there. There's very specific areas when you think about that metadata and what's required. So as you do a pilot around kind of that M-19-21 scanning and capture, you can also demonstrate appropriate management of that metadata as part of that process. So a pilot might be a way, similar to a Tiger Team approach, of being able to show capabilities and to show what's needed to be done to get compliant.
I think there's also just metrics out there on the information and data explosion. And so if you wanted to try to apply those generic metrics to your organization, one I've seen is that 30% of everything that's produced is redundant, obsolete, or transitory, like, should we get together for lunch? Yes. If I am the president and a foreign dignitary, that might be a record. If it's Linda and Pat, it's probably not. And so nationally, they're saying about 30%. And if you start looking at the volume of just information or volume of emails or volume of documents that any one organization produces, 30% is a pretty big number of dollar amount number that if you can easily eliminate that from your searches, that's huge.
Yep. We do have one question that came in the Q&A panel, and it was around the GovCloud. They were asking, isn't GovCloud an AWS product? The slide showed MS Azure GovCloud.
Yeah, there is the MAG, as they call it, Microsoft Azure GovCloud, which is just a standard Microsoft offering. AWS, obviously, Amazon Web Services, they have a GovCloud entry as well.
Okay, so yeah, branding overlap.
Yep, there's both.
Okay. If there are any more questions, throw them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them real quick, even though we are a little over time. If you think of questions later on, feel free to reach out to any of us through the email address that was on the previous slide, or you can reach out to Gimmal on info@gimmal.com. And let's see, there's a question that came in the chat. It's a little bit long here.
Yeah, so
we may have to respond to this one offline. It's going to take me a minute to read through the whole thing. So we'll get you an answer back.
We will, yep.
Well, everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. As we said, the slides, link to the slides and the recording will be coming out in the next 24 to 48 hours. So you'll have this for your reference, and feel free to reach out with any additional questions that you may have.
Thank you, Linda. Very much appreciate
thank you.
it.
Yeah, and good luck to everybody.
Linda, thank you very much for joining us today.